Have you ever been told you're too sensitive so many times that you start to wonder if maybe you're the problem? I used to believe that if someone loved you, they wouldn't make you doubt your own memory. I was wrong. For 3 years, I wasn't yelled at. I wasn't hit. I wasn't publicly humiliated. I was quietly convinced that everything was my fault. Until one night, I opened a folder, 83 pages thick, and realized the only person being manipulated was me. My name is Samantha Allen. I'm 31 years old. If you asked anyone who knew us, they would have said we were solid. Not flashy, not dramatic, just stable. The kind of relationship that looks good from the outside because it's quiet. Because there are no screaming matches in public. Because nothing ever looks wrong enough to leave over. That's the kind of relationship I thought I was in. I'd been with Douglas for 3 years. We'd lived together for 2 of them. In the apartment I'd been renting long before we met. When he moved in, it felt natural, inevitable, even. He needed a place closer to work. I had the space. We loved each other. That's how these things go, right? At least that's what I told myself. Looking back now, the signs didn't arrive all at once. They never do. They came quietly, disguised as jokes, misunderstandings, offhand comments I brushed away because love, real love, was supposed to involve compromise. Patience, self-reflection. The first time I noticed something was off, I didn't call it manipulation. I called it stress. We were standing in the kitchen one night, arguing about something trivial. I honestly don't even remember what it was anymore. Maybe dishes, maybe plans with friends. I remember saying, "That's not what you said yesterday." Douglas didn't raise his voice. He didn't get angry. He smiled, just a little. "I never said that," he replied calmly. "You're remembering it wrong." I laughed it off. Okay, I thought. Maybe I am. But it kept happening. I'd bring up a conversation we'd had, something he promised, something we agreed on, and he'd look at me like I'd just spoken a foreign language. "Why do you always do this?" he'd say. "Do what?" "Rewrite things. Make problems where there aren't any." Sometimes he'd sound genuinely confused. Other times, irritated. Occasionally amused, like I was a child insisting on something imaginary. "God, Samantha," he'd sigh, "you're so sensitive." That word became a recurring theme. Sensitive, emotional, dramatic. At first, I tried to adjust. I started second-guessing myself before bringing anything up. I replayed conversations in my head, wondering if I'd misunderstood his tone, his words, his intent. I apologized more. I smoothed things over before they escalated. I learned which topics to avoid entirely. And still, somehow, everything became my fault. If he snapped at me, it was because I'd pushed him. If he forgot something important, it was because I hadn't reminded him properly. If I felt hurt, it was because I took things the wrong way. He never yelled. That's the part people don't understand when I try to explain it now. Douglas didn't need to raise his voice to make me feel small. He was good with words. Precise, confident, certain. And certainty is powerful when you're starting to doubt your own. About 1.5 years into our relationship, something shifted inside me. We'd had an argument about my sister's birthday dinner. I was sure, absolutely sure, that I'd told him we were going together, that I'd reminded him twice, that he'd agreed. Douglas insisted I hadn't. Not only that, he told me I'd promised we wouldn't go. "You said you didn't feel like dealing with your family that night," he said. "You told me to make other plans." I remember standing there, my heart pounding, my mouth dry. "I would never say that," I replied. "You know that's not true." He tilted his head, studying me. "Why would I lie about that?" he asked softly. "What would I gain?" That question lodged itself deep in my chest, because I couldn't answer it. I went to my sister's dinner alone that night, replaying the argument on a loop. By the time I got home, I was exhausted. Not from the socializing, but from the mental gymnastics, from trying to figure out where reality had slipped through my fingers. That was the night I opened a notes app on my phone and typed a single sentence. "Douglas says I promised to cancel." I don't remember doing that. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't strategic. It was a lifeline. At first, the notes were messy, incomplete. I wrote them late at night, or in the bathroom, or during my lunch break at work. Just fragments. Things he said, arguments we had, moments that left me feeling unsteady. I told myself it was temporary, that once things calmed down, I'd delete them. But things didn't calm down. They escalated. The comments became sharper, the dismissals more frequent. He started joking about my bad memory in front of friends, laughing when I corrected him. "You should write this down," he'd say with a smirk, "before you forget it again." I laughed along. My stomach twisted every time. Some nights, lying next to him in bed, I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder when I'd started feeling like a guest in my own life, like someone who needed permission to trust her own thoughts. I didn't feel abused. That word felt too heavy, too dramatic. I just felt off balance, like the ground beneath me kept shifting just enough that I couldn't get comfortable. The notes grew longer, more detailed. Dates, times, exact phrases when I could remember them, screenshots of text messages that contradicted his later claims. Not because I wanted to trap him, because I needed to know if I was losing my mind. There's a special kind of fear that comes with questioning your own reality. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It makes you doubt the simplest things, what you heard, what you felt, what you know. And once that doubt takes root, it spreads. By the time I realized I was apologizing for things I hadn't done, defending myself against accusations that made no sense, and rehearsing conversations before having them just to avoid conflict, something inside me had already changed. I wasn't trying to fix the relationship anymore. I was trying to survive it. I didn't know it yet, but the moment I started writing things down was the moment everything shifted. Because once you start looking for patterns, you can't unsee them. It's strange how memory works when you're no longer trying to defend someone. Once I stopped automatically explaining Douglas away, once I stopped telling myself he didn't mean it like that, moments I'd buried started resurfacing on their own. Not dramatically, quietly, one by one. There was the night I came home exhausted from work and went straight to the couch, kicking off my shoes without saying much. I wasn't upset, I wasn't angry, I was just tired. Douglas paused the TV and turned to me. "You're being weird," he said. I remember blinking, caught off guard. "What?" "You've been off all evening," he replied. "Did I do something?" The question sounded reasonable, concerned even. But the way he watched me, like he was waiting for a confession, made my stomach tighten. "No," I said slowly, "I'm just exhausted." He nodded once, then added casually, "Okay, just don't take it out on me." That line stayed with me, because I hadn't done anything, yet somehow I was already being warned. Another memory surfaced. One I'd brushed aside at the time because it felt too small to matter. We were grocery shopping, standing in the cereal aisle, when I mentioned, lightly, that money was a little tight that month and maybe we could be more mindful with spending. Douglas laughed. "You're really stressing over this?" he said. "You worry too much." "I'm not worrying," I replied. "I'm just saying." "Here we go," he interrupted. "Why do you always turn everything into a problem?" I remember lowering my voice, glancing around, suddenly embarrassed. By the time we reached the checkout, I was apologizing for being tense, for killing the mood, for making things uncomfortable. He accepted the apology like it was owed. Then there was the night with friends, the one that replayed itself in my head long after everyone else forgot it. Someone mentioned an upcoming concert. Douglas laughed and said, "Oh, Samantha hates live music. She complains the whole time." I felt my body go still. "That's not true," I said carefully. "I love live music." He smiled at me like I'd misunderstood a joke. "You say that, but you always find something wrong." A couple people chuckled, not cruelly, just enough. I remember thinking, that's not how I see myself, and then immediately wondering if maybe he was right. In the car afterward, I told him it bothered me. "You made me sound difficult," I said. He sighed, already annoyed. "I was joking. Why do you always assume the worst?" "I wasn't assuming. You're too sensitive," he cut in. "That's the problem. You hear criticism where there isn't any." By the time we pulled into the parking lot, the original issue had vanished. All that remained was that familiar knot in my chest, the sense that I'd somehow failed a test I didn't know I was taking. What unsettled me most wasn't any single moment. It was the pattern. Douglas never outright denied events. He reframed them. He didn't argue facts. He argued my interpretation. "That's not what I meant." "You're twisting it. You're projecting." If I was hurt, it was because I misunderstood. If I was upset, it was because I was insecure. If I felt confused, it was because I was emotional. Every disagreement ended the same way. Him, calm, logical, disappointed. Me, apologizing, second-guessing, shrinking. I started noticing how often he positioned himself as the reasonable one, especially in front of other people. If I disagreed with him publicly, he'd laugh it off. If I pushed back privately, he'd accuse me of starting fights. If I stayed quiet, he'd ask why I was sulking. There was no version of me that didn't somehow reinforce his narrative. One night, lying awake beside him, listening to his breathing, slow into sleep, I stared at the ceiling and felt something I didn't have a word for yet. Not anger, not sadness, disorientation. Like living in a house where the furniture kept shifting just enough that I kept bumping into things, and somehow it was always my fault for not remembering where they were. I didn't think, this is abuse. I thought, why am I working this hard just to feel normal? And that question, quiet, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore, followed me everywhere. Because once you start looking back without excuses, you start seeing how carefully the confusion was built. There's a moment, quiet, almost unremarkable, when denial finally gets tired. For me, it happened late one night, long after Douglas had fallen asleep. The apartment was dark except for the soft glow of my phone screen. I wasn't upset. I wasn't crying. I was just awake, alert in a way that felt new. I kept replaying conversations in my head, not to argue with them anymore, but to understand them, to figure out why they all ended the same way, why I always walked away smaller than when I entered. I didn't type his name into the search bar. I typed mine. Why do I feel crazy in my relationship? The results weren't dramatic, no flashing warnings, no big red flags screaming at me to leave, just articles, forums, first-person stories written by people who sounded disturbingly like me. You're overthinking. You're too emotional. You remember things wrong. I kept reading. One phrase appeared again and again, dressed up in different language but carrying the same weight. Gaslighting. I didn't like the word. It felt heavy, accusatory, like something people used online when they wanted to villainize an ex. So I kept scrolling. I read about emotional manipulation, about power dynamics, about how control doesn't always look like shouting or threats. It can look like calm certainty, like confidence, like someone who never doubts themselves, especially when you do. There was a checklist in one article. I told myself I wouldn't take it seriously. I took it seriously anyway. Makes you question your memory. Rewrites past conversations. Positions themselves as the rational one. Accuses you of being too sensitive. Becomes defensive when criticized. Lacks empathy during conflict. I stopped halfway through. Not because it didn't fit. Because it fit too well. I locked my phone and stared at the ceiling, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with resistance. This doesn't mean anything, I told myself. Anyone could relate to a few of these. So the next night, I went deeper. Academic articles, clinical language, detached explanations. I wanted something cold and objective, something that couldn't be accused of being dramatic. That's when I saw it. Narcissistic personality disorder. I almost laughed out loud. No, I whispered into the dark. That's not it. Douglas wasn't arrogant in the way people imagine narcissists to be. He didn't brag. He didn't dominate rooms. He didn't think he was perfect. He just thought he was right. Always. Still, I read. Not to diagnose him. I told myself that repeatedly, but to understand the patterns, the behaviors, the emotional mechanics, need for control, fragile self-image, rage or dismissal when challenged, rewriting reality to protect ego. I felt something inside me stiffen, because I wasn't reading about a monster. I was reading about a dynamic, one where one person stays steady by making the other unstable. Over the next few days, I noticed things I'd ignored before. How Douglas reacted when I questioned him, not with curiosity, but irritation. How quickly conversations turned into lectures about my tone, my timing, my attitude. How he could criticize me freely, but bristled at even gentle feedback. One night I tried something small, experimental. I didn't love how that conversation went earlier, I said carefully. It made me feel dismissed. Douglas looked at me, surprised. Wow, he replied. So now I'm not allowed to speak? That was it. That was the pivot. Suddenly, I wasn't expressing a feeling, I was attacking him. I didn't say that, I replied. You implied it, he said flatly. And honestly, this is exhausting. Exhausting. That word echoed in my head long after he walked away. Because I was exhausted too. But I wasn't allowed to say it. The more I read, the clearer something became, and it terrified me. This wasn't about fixing communication. This was about power. About who got to define reality when there was disagreement. And it wasn't me. I started seeing our relationship less like a partnership and more like a courtroom where I was always on trial, and Douglas was both judge and jury. Evidence didn't matter. Intent didn't matter. Only his interpretation survived. The idea that this dynamic had a name, that other people had lived it, documented it, survived it, was both comforting and horrifying. Comforting because it meant I wasn't alone. Horrifying because it meant this wasn't accidental. One article ended with a sentence I couldn't shake. Clarity is the enemy of manipulation. I closed my phone and sat in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic outside. If that was true, if clarity really was dangerous, then the unease I felt wasn't a weakness. It was a threat. And for the first time since I'd met Douglas, I realized something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't asking myself how to make things better anymore. I was asking myself what would happen if I stopped doubting my own mind. I didn't plan the conversation. That's the lie people expect, that I waited for the perfect moment, rehearsed my lines, plotted some dramatic reveal. The truth is much less cinematic. I was just tired. It was a weeknight. Nothing special. Douglas had decided he was too exhausted to cook, even though it had technically been his turn. So we ordered Thai takeout and ate on the couch, cartons balanced on our knees. The TV played something neither of us was really watching. I remember thinking, if I don't say it now, I never will. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice even. Hey, I said casually, like I was asking about weekend plans. I've been thinking, what would you say to us trying couples therapy? He didn't answer right away. He looked up from his phone slowly, like I'd just interrupted something important. You can't be serious, he said. I am, I replied. That's when he laughed. Not a warm laugh, not surprised. That short, sharp sound he made when he thought I'd said something ridiculous. Therapy is for broken people. I took a breath. I could feel the familiar instinct rising, the urge to backpedal, to soften it, to make it a joke. Instead, I said, exactly. The laugh stopped. Douglas stared at me. What's that supposed to mean? It means something isn't working, I said carefully. Maybe it's me. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's both of us. But something's broken here, and I think we need help figuring out what. His expression hardened. Nothing is broken, he said. You're just always looking for problems. I'm not, I replied. I'm saying I don't feel okay, and I don't think this dynamic is healthy. There it is, he said. This again? I felt my chest tighten. What again? You blaming me for your issues, he snapped. You're the one who's unhappy. You're the one who can't just be content. The old version of me would have stopped there, would have apologized, would have tried to reassure him that I wasn't blaming him, that I just wanted us to be better. But something inside me stayed steady. I reached down beside the couch and pulled my laptop bag closer. My fingers brushed the edge of a folder inside. Douglas noticed. What's that? He asked. I hesitated for half a second. Then I pulled it out and handed it to him. It was thick, professionally bound, color-coded tabs visible along the side. Research, I said, and documentation. His face changed immediately. What kind of documentation? Patterns, I replied. Conversations. Things that keep happening. I needed to understand what was going on. He stared at the folder like it was dangerous. Then he laughed again, but this time there was no humor in it. You've been documenting me? I've been documenting our relationship, I said. Because every time I tried to talk to you about problems, you told me I was remembering things wrong. He flipped it open. I watched his eyes move over highlighted paragraphs, dates, screenshots, notes. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then his face flushed red. This is insane, he whispered. Then louder. This is insane. You've been spying on me. I've been protecting my sanity, I replied. There's a difference. You're sick, he said. Normal people don't do this. Normal people don't get told they're crazy every time they speak, I shot back. Normal people don't spend years walking on eggshells. He threw the folder at me. Pages scattered across the floor. I'm not a narcissist, he yelled. You're just trying to make me the villain because you can't handle that you're the problem. I never said you were, I replied, my voice shaking but firm. I said these patterns match, and I think a professional should help us figure out what's actually happening. No, he snapped. Absolutely not. I'm not going to sit in some office while you and some stranger gang up on me. Something inside me went quiet. Then we're done, I said. He froze. What? If you won't work on this with me, I can't stay, I continued. I've spent 3 years doubting myself. I'm done doing that. You can't break up with me over this. Watch me. He stormed into the bedroom and slammed the door. I stayed on the couch, surrounded by scattered pages, my hands trembling. That night I slept there, and for the first time in months, I slept better than I had in a very long time. I woke up to the sound of someone standing too close. For a split second, I didn't know where I was. The couch, the dim morning light filtering through the blinds, my neck stiff, my phone still loosely in my hand. Then I opened my eyes. Douglas was standing over me. He looked calm in that unnerving way that usually meant he'd already decided what the story was going to be. And I was about to be informed of my role in it. I've been up all night, he said. I sat up slowly. Okay. I read all of it, he continued, nodding toward the coffee table where the folder had been restacked with aggressive neatness. That garbage. I didn't respond. You manipulated everything, he said. You took things out of context. You twisted my words. That's not true, I replied quietly. This is defamation, he snapped. Do you even know how illegal this is? I almost laughed. Almost. Defamation requires publication to a third party, I said. This is private. Don't lawyer speak me, he barked. I'm not, I said evenly. I'm stating a fact. His jaw tightened. I could sue you. You could try, I replied. You'd lose, but you could try. That's when he picked up his coffee mug and hurled it at the wall. It shattered inches from my head. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It was the first time he'd ever gotten physical with objects while I was in the room. I'd suspected it had happened before. Doors slammed too hard, things broken when I wasn't home, but seeing it confirmed something in me. Fear didn't rush in. Clarity did. I want you out, he said, breathing hard. Get your things and leave. I stood up. This is my apartment, I said. My name is on the lease. I've lived here for 5 years. You moved in 2 years ago. I pay rent, he argued. No, I said. You pay $400 a month for groceries. You insisted that was fair because you make less than me. The rent is $18.50. His face flushed. I have rights, he said. You can't just kick me out. I'm not kicking you out, I replied. You're welcome to stay, but I'm also welcome to break up with you, which I'm doing. He stared at me. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore. He stormed into the bedroom and slammed the door. 10 minutes later, I heard his voice drop into something softer, practiced. She's being cruel, he said, after everything I've done for her. I didn't need to hear the rest to know who he was calling. His mother. The phone rang 20 minutes later. I stared at it for a moment before answering. How dare you treat my son this way, she demanded. He's given you 3 years of his life. With respect, I said, your son has spent those 3 years making me doubt my own sanity. Oh, please, she scoffed. What kind of psycho documents their relationship? The kind who keeps being told she's remembering things wrong, I replied. The kind who needs proof she's not crazy. You are crazy, she snapped. My son is a wonderful, loving man. If you can't see that, you don't deserve him. I closed my eyes. And I guess we agree on one thing, I said, and hung up. I didn't feel guilty. I felt finished. Over the next few days, Douglas cycled through versions of the same reaction. He raised his voice, then he went cold. Then he talked about everything he'd sacrificed for me. Then he snapped again when I didn't soften. It wasn't grief. It was wounded pride. When anger didn't move me, he tried self-pity. When that failed, he tried intimidation. And when neither worked, he pretended nothing was wrong at all. On the third night, I came home to candles lit on the table, dinner cooking, music playing softly in the background. He wore the shirt I liked best on him. I've been thinking, he said gently. Maybe we could try that therapy thing, if it means that much to you. My chest tightened. Okay, I said. I found a therapist who specializes in relationship dynamics. She has an opening next Tuesday. His smile flickered. Wait, he said. You already made an appointment? I said I was serious. I need more time, he said quickly. I need to think. What's there to think about? I asked. You just said you'd try. I said maybe, he snapped. Don't put words in my mouth. There it was. Again. You literally just... See, he cut in. This is exactly what you do. You twist everything I say. I stopped talking. I picked up the folder and opened it. What are you doing? He demanded. Writing this down, I said. You're sick, he muttered. Maybe, I replied calmly. That's why I want us to see a professional. He didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. And honestly, it was the most peaceful evening I'd had in months. The first message came from someone I hadn't spoken to in weeks. Hey, are you okay? It was vague enough to feel harmless, but my stomach dropped the moment I read it. I replied carefully, why? There was a pause. Then, Douglas says you've been psychologically abusing him. I stared at the screen. Abusing him. By the end of that day, more messages followed. Different people. Same careful tone. The kind that keeps emotional distance, like they aren't sure which version of you they're allowed to talk to anymore. What's going on with you and Douglas? He says you've been controlling him. Is it true you've been keeping records about him? Each message was phrased differently, but they all carried the same hesitation. Douglas hadn't wasted any time. Once he realized he couldn't control the situation inside the apartment, he took it outside. Friends, family, anyone who would listen. He positioned himself as the calm, concerned boyfriend who had finally escaped a controlling, obsessive partner. According to him, I had been secretly documenting his behavior, diagnosing him with mental illness, monitoring his every move. He told people he felt unsafe. I learned this in fragments, through awkward texts and uncomfortable phone calls, half questions, loaded concern, silence where trust used to be. I didn't argue. I didn't send long explanations. I didn't try to defend myself in group chats. I sent the same message to everyone. I'm happy to talk about this in person. I'll show you exactly what I documented and why. Then you can decide for yourself. 2 people accepted. 1 didn't respond at all. The first was Mark, a friend I'd known since college. He'd seen me through bad relationships before, had watched me grow quieter over the past year, even if neither of us had named it at the time. He came over on a Sunday afternoon. We sat at the kitchen table while he went through the folder in silence. The quiet stretched. After nearly an hour, he leaned back and rubbed his face. "Samantha," he said slowly, "this is a lot." "I know. Some of this is genuinely disturbing." He paused on a page and looked up at me. "He actually told you that you made up your grandmother's death to avoid his birthday dinner?" I nodded. "My grandmother died 2 days before his birthday," I said. I showed him the obituary. Mark stared at the page. "And he said?" "That I probably stressed her out on purpose," I replied, "so she'd die at a convenient time." He sat there stunned. "That's not a misunderstanding," he said quietly. "That's not poor communication." "No," I said, "it's not." When he left, he hugged me, longer than usual. "I'll set the record straight," he said, "with anyone who asks." The second person was Lena, one of Douglas's coworkers. We weren't close, but we'd gotten friendly at work events. She arrived skeptical, guarded. She didn't speak much while reading, just frowned occasionally, nodded once or twice. Then she stopped at a screenshot. "He sent this to you?" she asked. Douglas's words stared back at us. "You're pathetic. You're lucky anyone even puts up with you. You should be grateful I'm with you." "That was last Christmas," I said, "because I didn't get him the exact watch he wanted." Lena looked up sharply. "He told us you forgot to get him anything," she said, "that you only bought something after he got upset." I slid the next page forward. "Check the date," I said, "December 23rd. I gave him the gift on the 22nd. She went quiet. Lena left without saying whose side she was on, but she stopped participating in the group chat where I'd apparently been described as a monster. I counted that as progress. Meanwhile, Douglas announced he was moving out. He told people he was finally escaping my abuse, that he'd be staying with his sister until he found a place of his own. "Great," I said when he told me. "When are you leaving?" "Saturday." "Perfect. I'll make sure I'm here in case you need help carrying boxes," I added. "I don't need your help," he snapped. "Suit yourself." What he didn't mention was that he'd also been telling his family I was withholding his belongings. Friday night, his father showed up at my door. "You need to give my son his things," he demanded. I blinked. "All his stuff is exactly where he left it." "He says you locked up his clothes." "The bedroom closet is unlocked," I replied. "Always has been." He pushed past me without asking and checked. A minute later, he came back out, visibly embarrassed. "I see," he muttered. "I'd suggest you start fact-checking Douglas's claims," I said evenly. He didn't argue, just nodded and left. I heard later, through the same grapevine Douglas had been poisoning, that the conversation he had with his son afterward hadn't gone well. Apparently, even his own family was starting to notice the stories didn't line up. Saturday arrived. Douglas's sisters showed up with a rental truck. They packed loudly, deliberately, slamming drawers, dropping boxes, making sure I knew they were there. I stayed in the living room, watching TV, not engaging. Before he left, Douglas stopped in front of me. "You're going to regret this," he said. "You'll never find anyone as good as me." I met his eyes. "Probably not," I said, "but I hope I find someone better." For a second, I thought he might hit me. Instead, he grabbed his bag and stormed out. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the walls. And just like that, 3 years of my life walked out the door. I sat there for a moment, just breathing. Then I stood, opened every window in the apartment, and let the air move through the space. Let it carry away the last traces of his cologne. I ordered a pizza. It was the first meal I'd enjoyed in months. For a few weeks, things were quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet in the way a room feels after something loud has been removed. I started sleeping in my bed again. I stopped flinching at every notification. I let myself believe the worst of it was over. I was wrong. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, slid halfway under my door like it didn't want to be seen. Notice of intent to file civil action. I read it once, then again, then a third time, slower, like the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense if I stared long enough. Douglas was suing me. Emotional distress, invasion of privacy, illegal surveillance. According to the letter, my documentation constituted a pattern of psychological abuse designed to gaslight him into believing he had a mental disorder. I'd caused him severe harm, trauma, reputational damage. I laughed. It came out sharp and short, surprising even me. The irony was almost impressive. My hands were steady when I picked up my phone and called a lawyer. A real one. Someone I'd been referred to by a colleague who didn't ask questions, just gave me a number and said, "Call him." He read the letter while I waited on the line. Then he laughed too. "This is frivolous, frivolous," he said. "One-party consent recordings are legal in your state. Writing down your own experiences isn't surveillance, and you didn't publish anything." "So, what happens now?" I asked. "We respond," he said. "And when this gets thrown out, we counter for attorney's fees. If he wants to pursue this, discovery is going to be very interesting for him." "Discovery?" "Discovery means he has to turn over every communication about you," he explained. "Texts, emails, messages, group chats, everything." I closed my eyes. Douglas had never been careful with his words. He'd been confident, casual, certain no one would ever look too closely. "Okay," I said, "proceed." The next few weeks blurred together into paperwork and emails and quiet, methodical preparation. His lawyer requested copies of my documentation. I provided them without hesitation. We requested his communications. His lawyer objected. The judge overruled. What came back was illuminating. There were texts to his sister from over a year earlier, complaining that I was controlling because I asked him to contribute more to groceries. Messages to his mother, claiming I was isolating him because I suggested he spend less time with friends who only called when they needed something. A group chat with coworkers where he described me as mentally unstable because I was upset when he forgot our anniversary. But the most damaging evidence wasn't what he said about me. It was what he said about himself. Douglas had kept notes too. Not organized, not careful, just casual messages sent when he felt smug or amused. "She's so easy to manipulate. I just apologize and she folds. She always thinks everything's her fault." There were messages bragging about how he'd gotten me to pay for things, laughing about how often he made me apologize for conversations he started, telling his sister I was too stupid to realize what he was doing. His own words contradicted his lawsuit entirely. My lawyer compiled everything and filed a motion to dismiss, with a request for sanctions against Douglas's attorney for pursuing a claim with no legal basis. The judge granted both. The case was dismissed. Douglas's attorney was ordered to pay my legal fees, $4,200. And because that attorney wasn't absorbing the cost out of kindness, Douglas was now responsible for a bill he absolutely could not afford. I heard later, through the same quiet channels gossip always travels, that Douglas tried to blame his lawyer, claimed he'd been misled, promised things that hadn't been possible. The lawyer dropped him as a client. The phone rang a few days later. I didn't need to check the number to know who it was. "You've ruined my son's life," his mother said the moment I answered. I didn't raise my voice. "Your son ruined his own life," I replied. "I just documented it." "You're a monster." "Maybe," I said calmly, "but at least I'm a monster with receipts." She hung up. I blocked the number. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was clean. The quiet that followed didn't arrive all at once. It settled in slowly, like dust after a storm. No more angry messages, no more secondhand warnings, no more people asking me to explain myself in hushed tones. Douglas was gone. The lawsuit was over, and for the first time in years, nothing was demanding my attention. I stayed in the apartment. The same one that had once felt like enemy territory, every room loaded with memories, every corner echoing with arguments that never quite made sense. I expected it to feel haunted. It didn't. It felt empty, in a good way. I slept in my bed again, not curled tight at the edge, but stretched out. I stopped waking up braced for conflict. I let the mornings be quiet without wondering who I was about to disappoint. Small things started to feel different. I used the coffee maker Douglas used to mock for being cheap. It worked perfectly fine. I stopped flinching when my phone buzzed. I laughed, out loud, at a joke on television and realized I hadn't done that in months. I started seeing a therapist. Not couples therapy, just therapy. The first session was mostly silence. I didn't know where to begin without turning it into a justification. Without explaining why I'd stayed so long. The therapist didn't rush me. She didn't label anything right away. She just listened. When I finally stopped talking, she said something simple. "It sounds like you learned to mistrust your own perceptions." That sentence landed harder than any accusation ever had. Because it was true. 3 years of being told I was sensitive, emotional, forgetful, dramatic. 3 years of internalizing someone else's version of events until I couldn't tell where his certainty ended and my doubt began. Healing, I learned, wasn't dramatic either. It was slow, uncomfortable, uneventful. Some friends drifted back after hearing what really happened. Others stayed distant, still convinced there had to be two sides. I let them go. Anyone who needed me to be the villain so they could stay comfortable was never really on my side to begin with. One afternoon, I pulled the folder out of the cabinet where it had been living since the lawsuit ended. 83 pages. I flipped through them once, not to relive anything, just to acknowledge what had been there. The proof, the pattern, the version of myself who'd needed that much evidence just to believe her own mind. Then I dropped it into the trash. I waited for some big emotional release, a wave of triumph, closure. It didn't come. It felt like taking out the garbage, which in a way it was. I'm not dating anyone. I'm not in a hurry to be. My therapist says I need time to rebuild trust, not in other people, but in myself. She's probably right. But here's what I know now. I wasn't crazy. I was never crazy. I was just with someone who needed me to believe I was. And once I stopped believing that, everything changed. It came from a stranger. A comment buried under one of the updates someone had shared after everything was over. No accusations, no advice, just a single question that stopped me longer than I expected. Do you regret making the folder? Wouldn't it have been easier to just leave without all the documentation and drama? I read it twice, because on the surface it made sense. If I'd left earlier, quietly, none of this would have escalated. No smear campaign, no lawyer, no months spent untangling truth from fiction in front of other people. But the question assumed something that had never been true, that leaving was easy. That clarity was available before proof. I thought back to the version of myself who'd sat on that couch months earlier, staring at the ceiling, wondering why every disagreement ended with her apologizing. The version of me who'd started to feel like a guest in her own life. The one who needed to write things down just to remember what she'd said out loud. That woman couldn't have just left. Not because she lacked strength, but because she lacked certainty. That folder didn't trap me in the relationship. It saved me from disappearing inside it. So no, I don't regret it. I regret the years I spent explaining away behavior that should have been confronted sooner. I regret how long it took me to trust my own discomfort. I regret believing that love meant shrinking. But I don't regret protecting my sanity when nothing else felt solid. Would I recommend documenting a relationship to everyone? No. But if you're starting to feel like you can't trust your own memory, if you're being told you're too sensitive every time you're hurt, if you find yourself apologizing after conversations you didn't start, write things down. Not to win, not to punish, not to diagnose, to ground yourself. You're not paranoid for wanting clarity. You're not dramatic for needing consistency. You're not broken for noticing patterns. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is refuse to be confused any longer. I wasn't crazy. I was just with someone who needed me to believe I was. And now, I don't.